Hi everyone, it's Lindsay with High Altitude Astrology, and today I'm bringing you a video about Saturn turning retrograde. This is something that happens once every 12 months, and it occurs for about 4.5 months. This time, Saturn's going to be retrograding at 1 degree of Aquarius. And you can see here on the chart that we have Saturn at 1 degree Aquarius, 57 minutes. And the retrograde is going to happen on Sunday, May 10th at 10:10 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And it's going to continue from 1 degree of Aquarius until it actually retrogrades back into the sign of Capricorn. And that's going to happen on the 2nd of July. And it will stay in Capricorn until it turns direct on the 28th of September at 25 degrees of Capricorn. And then it will move in direct motion back through the sign of Capricorn until it enters Aquarius for the final time on the 17th of December 2020. So really, we're going to be experiencing this retrograde, like I said, for the next 4 months. And what happens with any retrograde process is that the energy of the planet turns inward. So it just doesn't operate in the same outward function. It actually turns inward, and we have an opportunity to review, or we have an opportunity to reorganize or refocus, or anything with the re's, this particular energy, and see how it's operating for us in our life, whether it's working or not, and how we may want to adjust or change the energy. So Saturn has to do with several things, but one of the main things it has to do with is our work. It has to do with the effort that we put towards creating in our lives. And it often has to do with the things that we do on a daily basis in order to create security for ourselves. It has to do with the structures and the laws in which we abide by in our lives, as well as societally, because Saturn is a planet that does rule the group mind, and it's considered a social planet in that sense. So we have Saturn, which is this principle of discipline, effort, making things happen, basically. A few other keywords: responsibility, goals, and personal authority. And what's happened is that it's been in the sign of Aquarius since the beginning of, actually, since March 22nd. And it's been slowly moving through Aquarius, and now is going to spend part of its retrograde going back through that beginning couple of degrees of Aquarius. But as it's moved into the sign of Aquarius, we've begun to be able to see where we need to basically look from a society perspective at the structures and the laws that basically our society is ruled by or run by, and have a more expanded perspective, because that is Aquarius. Aquarius is about the future. Aquarius is about progress. Aquarius has a lot to do with being an individual, even though you recognize that we live as a group and that our actions affect the group. So it actually also rules the experience of humanity, or the ideal of humanity. So we've begun to see a little bit, as Saturn has moved into the sign of Aquarius, that we're really going to have to start integrating lessons, that's very Saturnian, around around acting more in a humanitarian way, about creating laws and structures that are more humanitarianly oriented. Some of us during this COVID pandemic may be starting to see how we may need to adjust our own personal work so that it's allows us more freedom. That's very much Aquarius, and seeing the work that it's going to take, especially when Saturn comes back into Aquarius and is in that sign permanently at the end of the year for the following 2.5 years. But we may be getting a taste of like what the work to come is going to be about, as far as how we can transition our lives, our work, the structures in our lives that do bring more freedom to our lives, because that is very much what Aquarius is about. It's also interesting, I made a note that one of the things that I've noticed since Saturn's moved into Aquarius is that YouTube, for example, is cracking down on its rules, that's very Saturnian, around the content that it's going to be a platform for. And the purpose of that is so that the information, that's very Aquarian, that is going out to everybody is not harmful and is more supportive of, in a way, humanity, because there's been a lot of in this like conspiracy theory type of things that have developed since the COVID pandemic that YouTube has become kind of a platform for. And so they've kind of laid down the law, Saturn, and said, you know what, we're not going to, promote something that doesn't or that contradicts the science, Aquarius, behind the virus. And some of these theories basically, contradict the science and say that either the virus doesn't exist in reality, or there's certain ways you can rid the virus that aren't scientifically proven, or there's ways that the virus is actually being spread that isn't scientifically proven. So that's an interesting sort of development around Saturn and Aquarius. It's like there's got to be codes of law and structure that protect, in a way, humanity through this Saturn and Aquarius process. All right, so going back to Saturn retrograde, what I feel this retrograde is going to be about for a lot of us, like I just mentioned, is perhaps looking at the work that we do, looking at the structures that have kind of created our life up until this point, and showing us where maybe we need to let go of some of the traditional ways that we have thought we needed to make a living or earn an income, or any kind of those sort of codified societal structural concepts that we have subscribed to that maybe aren't going to make sense moving forward, because Saturn in Capricorn is very traditional. Saturn, which is the sign that Saturn's going to be going back into, and this is going to be happening when Saturn reaches 29 degrees of Capricorn on July 2nd. And I'm going to move the wheel here. So here we can see July 1st at 5:36 p.m. At this point, you can see Saturn is at 29 degrees of Capricorn. So this is during the retrograde that it's going to now move back into the previous sign that it had been in for 2 years. And this is Saturn's home sign, Saturn in Capricorn. But what's different about Saturn in Capricorn at this time is that Pluto has been in a conjunction with Capricorn from the beginning of the year. And Pluto is all about death and transformation and rebirth. So there's something with this Pluto, with this Saturn retrograde cycle that is bringing up this theme again of the death and transformation of the Saturnian structures that we as a society live by. And that's why you're seeing, because in the sign of Capricorn, Capricorn is like, these are the, you know, the structures that create our society, the politics, the government, the authority that we, you know, invest in. This is all Saturn and Capricorn stuff, because Capricorn is about capitalism and climbing the corporate ladder and, you know, gaining as much as we can, you know, and this whole structure since the Pluto Saturn conjunction at the beginning of January, we're just starting to see, you know, it's just kind of falling apart. You know, our economy essentially is going through a huge transformation, and we don't know what's next, and we don't know what it's going to look like, and it's going to take time to understand that. But a lot is certainly going to change, especially once Saturn finishes this retrograde and eventually comes back into Aquarius. It's just going to really open our eyes up to different possibilities of how we can create new foundation and structure in our lives and in society that is more inclusive of everyone, and that also at the same time honors everybody's individuality. You know, people are going to be looking for more freedom in their work. They're not going to want to do the 9 to 5 thing, you know, that we all have done in our lives. That's just not going to appeal anymore, and it's not even going to be possible anymore. You know, we're going to see more working from home and working through technology. That's very much Saturn in Aquarius. So this retrograde Saturn is basically going to be allowing us to kind of review our own relationship to structure, to responsibility, to goals, to personal authority in our own lives. And maybe this part of this Saturn retrograde, as it goes back into Capricorn and stays in Capricorn until it goes direct, and that's at the very end of September on the 28th at 25 degrees of Capricorn. You can see here on September 28th, that's when Saturn finally goes direct in the sign of Capricorn. So it's going to, you know, take some time for this review process to occur, and for us to perhaps even go, you know, maybe this is an opportunity to organize things a bit in our lives so that we can eventually, once Saturn goes back into Aquarius, have more of that that freedom, you know, that we're wanting to be working towards, or to be living eventually. So this might be a time where we're kind of reviewing, okay, where do we need to, you know, shore up our situations in our lives? Where do we need to work at kind of at how we're going to game plan this transition that we might want to be making in our lives. That's very much Saturn in Capricorn. Now, because it's retrograde, it's not always, you know, the time to be striking out. You know, Saturn retrograde is more reflective, and it's more about you know, planning and organizing perhaps behind the scenes, and just reviewing and looking at how we can take action once Saturn eventually goes direct, and this is again September 28th, then we can have more of a clear direction as to where we may want to be headed. And it's interesting to note that just as Saturn is going direct, there is a yod here between Venus at 25 degrees of Leo and the North Node at 23 degrees of Gemini, pointing right here at that Saturn, as Saturn is beginning to move direct. And a yod is called the finger of God. What it is it's sort of a very fated feeling energy. This is two inconjuncts, 150-degree angles between these energies, 150 degrees between Venus and Saturn, and 150 degrees between the North Node. and Saturn. And the inconjuncts are what those 150 degrees are. They're interesting because it's like Saturn can't actually see them very well, but they can work together very well because they're 60 degrees apart in compatible signs. Venus in Leo really wants to, Venus's appreciation of beauty and its money and its what we value. And in Leo, it's like what really makes our heart sing, you know, what really feels good to us, what and where do we want to express ourselves creatively. That's very much Venus in Leo, and it's sextiling the North Node in Gemini, North Node being collectively where we're all headed, and it's in a way it's kind of karmically where we're all headed as a society. And this is saying, this is more about like really focusing on the mind, really focusing on communicating, focusing on the local, the things that are happening around us locally. It's our local community. It's very kind of the people that are around us, the community around us, the environment around us. So what the North Node in Gemini is saying for the next year and a half is that collectively we're going to be really headed more in a contained, in a way, kind of direction where we're just focused on more on the mind and on communicating. And it's not these big opposite South Node and Sagittarius concepts of like world travel and big huge philosophies and big huge perspectives. It's more about the local. So this is saying that maybe there's more ways that we can creatively make money, that we can creatively express our passions, creatively express ourselves, in our local environment, but also just sort of staying more just kind of within the realm of our community and thinking more locally in a sense. And so that's kind of like the key to this yod. It's asking that Saturn to ultimately kind of, let go a bit of some of that identification with the old way of how traditionally we have been told we have to create a career or make money, and this is saying that there's other ways of imagining this work concept. And the inconjuncts, they're kind of something that ultimately sort of resolves itself naturally if we just kind of stay open and not get too caught up, I would also say, in like the fear. I mean, Saturn wants to kind of know where it's going and know the direction. And having just come through this retrograde cycle for the last, what has it been, 4.5 months since it's gone retrograde here in May, there may be some built up kind of just fear. I mean, that's definitely something that can happen with Saturn when it doesn't feel that it knows or it doesn't feel confident as to what's next. There can be some fear generated around it. But this is saying, we need to just trust that as Saturn begins to move forward, that a lot of this reflective time that we've had, we will be able to start putting into action the ideas that we've come up with or the game plan that we've come up with. And again, it's going to be staying open to the idea of how can we create more locally in our environment and really connect with something that is connected to our passions. That's very much Venus in Leo. So then after the 28th of September, Saturn's going to then move direct, and we're going to eventually have it move into the sign of Aquarius. And this is going to happen again mid-December, around the 17th, that's when Saturn will go back into 0 degrees of Aquarius. So we have a while here to really take this opportunity, take this time where things have, forcibly slowed it down, and really, not put a lot of pressure on ourselves to have it all figured out right now, but take this time to really experience the Saturn retrograde as an opportunity to, brainstorm about the work in our lives, and brainstorm about the goals in our lives, and what, and also this, talks about personal authority. It's like, what does that mean to us? And maybe it's really going to be about shaking us loose from this attachment to the Capricorn way of living. We've been so indoctrinated into capitalism and collecting our stuff, and that means you're worth something, and how much do we need? And we need more and more and more. And again, going back to the Pluto-Saturn conjunction in Capricorn at the beginning of January 2020, that was the beginning of this whole kind of breakdown of that philosophy, or that way of thinking things need to be done. And so this retrograde time over the next 4.5 months is gonna kind of continue to help shake us loose from that perspective, and unravel that a bit in our own lives, and help us maybe figure out how we can go about doing with less. And that could be a very big part of what the Saturn retrograde is all about, because Saturn wants to go out and achieve and conquer and attain, but with the retrograde time, it's like saying, nope, it's more about turning inward and kind of reviewing, like, well, what am I doing, and why am I doing that, and what do I want to do, and what are my goals, what am I really trying to gain here? And this is this Saturn moving through Capricorn one more time, retrograding, just kind of saying, all right, take a really good look at this, because maybe you don't really need everything that we've sort of believed or been told, or have just followed because that's the way it's always been. And then, once we kind of have this review, then we can, when Saturn goes direct and then finally goes into Aquarius, Saturn in Aquarius is really just going to change our goals. It's going to change where we want to put our energy, and we're going to want to do it in a way that brings us a lot more freedom, because that is what Aquarius is all about, is the freedom to not be enslaved to a Capricornian structure. Uranus rules Aquarius, and it's the energy that spins on its side, and it's different. It wants to be different, and so that when Saturn moves into Aquarius, it's just going to be a lot about really how can we create structures that bring us a lot more freedom in our lives. And this Saturn retrograde in Capricorn too may also be bringing us an opportunity to really kind of get in touch with our own individual kind of drive again, maybe give us an opportunity to rest a bit, to kind of intern a bit, but sort of gear up, for when Saturn's going to go direct, and when we can really start applying our effort again back out, into the world in a way that's more aligned with what we truly, want to be creating in our lives. And I wanted to read something from this book called The Astrologer's Handbook by Francis Sequoian and Louis Acker. And they write about Saturn. With Saturn, we come to grips with the harsh realities of dense physical manifestation. We learn that Rome was not built in a day, that it takes time and hard work to bring an idea into practical reality. Through the concentration and application involved in this process, we develop discrimination, willpower, and patience. These are some of the essentials for the development of true spirituality. Discrimination, willpower, and patience. So this, Saturn retrograde time is really offering us an opportunity to kind of get in touch with that part of ourselves again, and maybe see where we've been possibly like investing into Saturnian and Capricorn areas of life that we just, aren't relating to anymore, or just aren't producing in the way we want anymore, or just really aren't connected to what, we really want to be doing, because this whole idea of what is, valuable, the materialism of this world that we've been indoctrinated into is kind of crumbling in a way. And so we're learning, okay, we're getting in touch again with this, our ability to like have discipline, have willpower, have discrimination. And we're gonna kind of like foster that during this retrograde time, and then we'll be able to come back out of the retrograde and really be able to direct that energy in more productive ways, and ultimately, when Saturn moves into Aquarius, ways that bring us a lot more freedom in our lives. And one thing that I'm seeing that I just want to mention in this chart of the direct motion of Saturn on September 28th is that Saturn is creating a square to Mars in Aries, which will also be retrograding at that point, Mars in Aries. And Mars in Aries is also in its home sign, just as Saturn in Capricorn is. But Mars in Aries retrograde during the time that Saturn finally goes direct is interesting, because Mars is how we take action and how we put effort into things, and in Aries, it wants to just go. But with the Mars and Aries being retrograde at the time that Saturn goes direct, it's just another symbol, and it's squaring Mars. So there's a challenge between the expression of the two energies. I think what Mars in Aries retrograde squared Saturn in Capricorn going direct, it's that we're having an opportunity with Mars, the action energy, to see, okay, where are we putting energy? What are we putting energy into? How do we want to put our energy into these kind of new ways of self-discipline, new ways of willpower, new ways of personal authority that we want to bring forth after this Saturn in Capricorn retrograde time. And it's going to, take a little bit of time for us to figure out exactly, where we still want to be putting that energy. I mean, Saturn's come back online, so it's like, okay, we're ready to build and we want to put the effort in, but Mars in Aries is still retrograde at this point, so it's kind of saying, still needing some time to like reflect upon sort of this pioneering energy of Mars and Aries, and where do we want to focus that type of energy in our lives. So it's going to take a little bit more time after Saturn goes direct for Mars to kind of go through its retrograde, and it will go direct on November 13th. So basically like another month and a half later, we'll see Mars going direct in Aries. So, this is just going to be an interesting kind of remainder of the year, while we've got several planets going retrograde. We've got Venus going retrograde coming up here after Saturn does. And then we've got Jupiter going retrograde. And then we're going to have Mars going retrograde. So, and also Neptune here. So there's just going to be a lot of reflection, opportunity, and a lot of kind of reviewing and revisiting and revising, what we basically kind of want to be doing with our lives, because that is what Saturn in Capricorn, or the principle of Saturn in general, is all about. But Saturn going back through Capricorn during this time is really going to be bringing up, in general, like, what do we want to be doing in life? You know, what do we want to be focusing on? What is going to be the best place for us to really express our personal authority in life, and ultimately give us this experience of freedom that we want to have once Saturn moves into Aquarius. Well, thank you so much for watching my Saturn retrograde video. If you like my channel, please subscribe. I'd appreciate it. And I'll see you at the next video. Take care.